Do we? I saw you had some follow up in the notes, and then the topic that was moved over from the last set of notes. Do you want to go ahead and dive into those, and then we can wrap it up with thoughts on the event?
I thought that I would move this topic and my follow-up to the next episode and talk about the event because that's what I want to do. What do you think?
I'm good with that. The more I've thought about it, and I feel like I don't have a lot to say about the event, but then I feel like I probably do and just don't realize how much I have to say yet.
That's what I'm thinking. So I kind of want to start there, and if we run out of time, whatever.
Sounds good to me.
We can make it up as we go.
We're experts at that by now.
Totally. Oh, I do want to say, and this can be for later. There's it's just on my mind right now. There's a documentary on HBO Max about QAnon, and it's really good.
I might have to look it up. I haven't really paid much attention to HBO's content, I guess, for about the past year. So I didn't even know that they had done a documentary.
Are you familiar with Just Watch? There's an app called Just Watch.
I am not.
So you can put in with it. You can download Just Watch on your phone, and you can tell it all the streaming services you have. And then if you want to watch a movie or a TV show or something, you just search it, and it tells you if it's in. It tells you what streaming service it's in, where you can access it.
That's pretty handy.
Right, it's really handy. Anyway, a friend recommended. It's called Q Into the Storm, and the documentary started. They started recording and asking questions in 2017, and I think that's the same year Q started dropping messages. They go into so Q is using a site called 8chan, which is a derivative of 4chan, which was a derivative of 2chan, and it has its which has its base in Gamergate and the hacker collective Anonymous. I don't know if you remember Anonymous.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's an interesting chain there. So it was a good documentary.
I'll definitely put it on the list.
It'd be something I'd like to talk about at some point, but it's like 6 1-hour episodes.
I also went ahead and downloaded the Just Watch app, so I can check that out too.
It's a good app. So what are your initial thoughts on the Apple event?
Overall, I thought it was a pretty solid event. I got some of what I wanted. I was pleasantly surprised to see them bringing the Fitness Plus trainers in to talk about Fitness Plus as well. I think that's just a nice little touch as you get to know some of the personality of the trainers through the workouts. If you're leveraging the service, seeing them talk about upcoming features makes a lot of sense. And that just kind of stuck out to me because it's historically not a very Apple thing to do. But it does make a lot of sense that they would start folding that in more as the service grows. I think the most surprising aspect of it was that the watch didn't receive as big an update as I thought it might. But I do think making changes to what can be fit on the watch, as far as the screen and what that means for reducing size of components and things like that. Certainly a lot of work went into it. I think I was just expecting an additional thing, and I don't know what that is, just something else beyond what amounts to a screen size bump. I kind of want to hold off on thoughts on the phone and just talk about that in more detail, but I was very happy to see the sensor shift image stabilization come across the entire line.
Yeah, I was going to say I put in the notes you got what you wanted, and that the 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max have the same cameras.
Yes. Yep. That was my biggest concern going into it, was that there would be another gap between what was brought down to the 13 Pro and the Pro Max getting yet another new advancement in camera tech. So I do like seeing that unification across the range. What kind of initial impressions did you have?
Well, I was surprised that the iPad mini made an appearance. It had been neglected for quite some time. I wasn't expecting that. They made a cool update to it. They gave it a bigger screen with the same footprint. That's cool because it's got the iPad Air design as well, which is the same design as the iPad Pro and now the iPhone. So that was cool. I think it's cool that it's out there. I really liked the what they did with the watch. I thought that was some cool changes. I mean, there's only so many sensors. I guess there's only so many sensors you can stick into it. It's kind of like, it could be the Apple Watch Series 6S if you wanted to.
Yeah, and I think that's a fairly apt comparison. I think the biggest thing that I kind of wanted to see out of the watch was either more accuracy on like the blood oxygen sensor. It's something that actually became advertised as used for like the heart sensors. What is it? I guess FDA approval for monitoring instead of it just being more of a general fitness level monitoring, because it's accurate enough, but it's not accurate enough for really catching an issue unless there's a huge swing. And of course, there were rumors of like on-skin blood glucose monitoring. I don't know how much stock I put into that technology at this point because I haven't done any research on it, but it does seem like a logical evolution. And excuse me. And with as many different advertisements as I've seen about blood glucose monitoring as it relates to diet and overall health, it seems like that would be a logical evolution. But I also don't know how much that would mean in a day-to-day. But it is something that I was kind of hoping to see some other advancement there. I'm glad I didn't, because I don't feel compelled to upgrade my watch. So it's kind of a catch-22.
I thought it was interesting. There's no black watch. I don't know if you caught that.
I was interested overall in the way they did the color choices this time around. All of it is more bright, or maybe bright's not the right word, but not as subdued. If it's a color, you can tell it's a color, and it's not. Good comparison, or the most direct comparison. The Pacific blue in the 12 Pro is deep and subdued. It's a good-looking blue. And then this year, the Sierra blue on the 13 Pro is much brighter. It's much more of a pastel blue in comparison. And that seems to be kind of the general gist in the way they approached colors this time around. Or at least that's the feeling that I got as I watched it.
Yeah. There's no white and there's no black.
Did you notice that they repeatedly called out starlight as the whitish color?
but it's not exactly white, and I like the name. I think it's cool. I'd be interested in see what it looks like in person, but I just thought that was interesting. I mean, for a long time, like the from 20 years ago, the crisp white. It was, I've talked at least once about how I like the crisp white from 20 years ago, and it's been sort of iconic. And it still carries in some of the accessories like the AirTags and the AirPods, and the HomePod. And then they started doing, the iPhone came out and they did black. But, a lot of, for a long time, Apple was, they were selling products that were light gray and dark gray. I mean, essentially light gray and dark gray. And so it's interesting to see them do these other colors and like not have a light gray and a dark gray at all in the watch. And with the phone, I'm glad they stopped saying space gray because I'm not sure what in space is gray. Maybe the moon. I don't know.
Yeah, I went and pulled back up the iPhone 13 colors, not the Pro, because I didn't look as close at the colors on the 13. The blue and the red are definitely more vivid color choices. So my initial impression wasn't entirely accurate either. But I noticed they renamed the dark blackish one to Midnight.
Yeah, well, that color carries. I think that color exists on the watch, and it's got blue in it. Like that midnight color isn't totally black, or it's a. I think there's some blue hue in it.
Could be. I didn't look as close, but that would make sense given the blues that they use on some of the previous bands, like the braided loop and loop bands. That blue is a really dark blue, but it would pair really well with that midnight color.
Yeah. Well, one of the watch colors is in the base model is a midnight. They have green and midnight. Anyway, I think their colors are. I like that they're doing something different.
Yeah, I do too. And I think as I see them more, I will like the colors more. Those are just the things that are so tough to tell on a video. Seeing them in person, you tend to get a much better. Well, seeing them in person, you're always going to get a better understanding of the color than you will over video. But there's just something so significantly different when you see the color in person versus what you interpret the color to be across other media.
Yeah.
It's like I think overall, the Pacific Blue from last year was that way. I was kind of questionable on whether I would like it or not like it, and then when it showed up, it's like, oh, this is a really good looking blue.
I was really excited about the Pacific Blue, and I got it, and I was like, this is it. And I was like, oh, okay. We had the opposite responses.
Yeah, and this year I'm torn because I'm definitely going to get a 13 Pro. The camera improvements, we'll talk more about those, but they're too tempting to me not to get them. And my big decision now is, do I go with the lighter blue and hope that it looks much better in person than my fear, or do I go back to a boring graphite color?
If only they made the silver, not silver. I would. So the front is black now, which is like, I didn't like the white phone when the front was white for a long time. I wasn't okay with it. Like my iPhone 3G, I got white because it had a black front and it looked like the black phone with the black front, and then the white looked like Apple. And I when the iPhone 4 came out, I went with black because I wanted it day one, but also I didn't want the white front. So
I don't remember. I think it was the 4S that I went white.
How do you feel about that?
I mean, I liked it because it was that white aesthetic and, being immersed in the world of Apple equating white to the brand for a while. It felt like it was the right choice, but in practice and using it, I didn't like the contrast of the border. It looked a little bit off when you were using the phone.
Yeah, if they made the sides white, I'd go with white.
So should we dive a little more into the individual products, or
Yeah, I think we should talk about the iPhone Pro camera.
Before we do that, I want to circle back to Fitness Plus because the stuff that they announced was interesting. It wasn't exactly what I was hoping they would announce, but it makes sense to be a step of the next evolution.
Yeah, I think when listening to last week's or this week's show, I think when listening to this week's show, I was like, and after seeing today's event, I was like, oh, what you're wanting, I think might still come. It's just Apple's going to take a couple of steps to get there.
Yeah, and even in the event today, the heavy bags hanging in the backdrop are prominent. Like there's no way you can watch any real, I guess, semi-detailed information about Fitness Plus available and not notice that there are heavy bags on set as well. And
I did not notice that. I didn't notice them.
All right. Well, your homework is to rewatch the event until you do notice them. But I can't help but think it's coming. My thought is that what they're doing is making sure they have a catalog of the different types of workouts before they announce those types. Like just taking a step back and thinking about how would you launch like Pilates? You know, they mentioned that coming. I would expect you would launch with at least 20 or 30 different workouts within that category at different durations, because that's the whole point of Fitness Plus. And if you think about how many workouts that's designing and then recording and the production involved, I could see not necessarily wanting to bite off more than you can chew and do it right and maintain the same kind of quality that you've done up to this point. So adding over the course of a year 3 new categories and knowing that you would have to have workouts in the 5 to 45 minute, duration intervals and multiple within those intervals, it makes sense that you would only add a category or 2. Adding 3 by the time you add this get ready for the slopes program, whatever that actually entails, seems like it's quite a bit. Like I don't know of many groups or competing services that add that number of workouts over the course of a year. So it does seem like they're really going hard at creating that content and getting these different categories fully fleshed out. So it feels like something in the boxing or MMA genre has to be coming. It's just too popular of a style of workout from my limited exposure not to find appealing and something that would be worth mixing into what you offer as a service. I was just hoping to see it now. And then you add the group workout feature, even though that's not something that I necessarily am interested in. I mean, that feels like that's a huge hurdle to overcome and do it right. And so if you have the ability to have, what did they say it capped at, 32 people? Something like
32,
that.
Yeah. Like that's a whole class.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically recreating the class environment for today's remote learning type of environment. And so I do think it's neat. It's not a feature that I probably will ever leverage, but I do think it's neat. And I think it's a huge technological advancement for the platform.
Yeah, I think so too. I think one of the features that they added to Fitness Plus that I was not expecting was the miles of inspiration, the walking feature.
Oh, the walking conversation thing?
Time to walk. Yeah.
I've seen those pop up over the past year. I haven't done them just because I'm typically not doing just walking anymore at this point. But it's been prominent as something that wasn't available and I've liked the concept. It's just typically if I'm going to walk, I'm going to leverage that time to catch up on a podcast.
Right. I thought that was interesting, though. It's a thing to get people to walk who, it's something to listen to if you don't listen to podcasts, because there are people that don't listen to podcasts, and none of them are listening to this show right now.
Yep. And I do like the idea of expanding that to like the guided meditation.
Yeah, I thought the meditation looked really cool.
That's something I might actually give, at least a couple of shots and see what it's like. I'm not huge on guided meditation, but I'm willing to give it a shot just to see.
If nothing else, it's just a really nice moment of relaxation. I've done some guided meditation over the past year and a half that's been from the mindfulness app, and it's really lovely. You talked last time about listening to Jessica Sky and liking her British accent. It's a similar sort of thing.
Yeah, I laughed a little bit when she was one of the trainers they brought up to talk about mindfulness. Yeah. Just because of me mentioning her specifically in the last show.
I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but everything, all the equipment that they use, they link to. They either sell in the Apple online store or they link to in the Apple Fitness Plus page.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I actually, Manduka is a fairly big provider of yoga gear in general, and I've had 3 of their mats. I think I have 3. The one that I prefer to use, the one that I use most often, is an extra-sized one as far as length goes, just because I can reach, my hands and feet can be off the mat if I use a normal-sized yoga mat, just depending on what I'm doing. And so their oversized Pro mat has been a really nice addition. And then I used their, fitness mat would be a good way to think of it. It's technically a yoga mat, but it's also one that they sell for use with, to put a rowing machine on, that type of mat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I use one of those when I'm on the rower. I put it up underneath the rower just because I sweat profusely when I row. But, they're between them and Nike, you can pretty much find most of the gear across the 2 places.
Yeah. They even have all the rowers, the treadmills, the bikes.
I didn't look at the details on the rowers they link to. Are they linking to Water Rower on those? Because that's who makes those.
They link to Life Fitness Row HX Trainer.
Okay, so maybe it's not Water Rower. I know Water Rower makes a lot of different ones, and they make one that looks exactly like that at a glance. Ergata, City Row, both of those actually contract out to Water Rower.
This might as well, I don't know, but I think Life Fitness is I think the same equipment that Lifetime uses, the gym. So it's been a year and a half since I've been there, so
I'll take a look. I'll look it up. I'm always, at this point, I'm not overly curious because I already bought a Water Rower, but I've been much happier with it than I thought I would be.
I've told people about that.
Yeah, it just sounds and feels so much better. Like I don't want to ever deal with a magnetic resistance rower again. So iPhone.
Yeah.
Are you thinking you're going to sit this one out, or are you thinking you're going to potentially upgrade?
I'm totally sitting this one out.
I had a feeling when I was watching the announcements and the main focus being the camera features, I didn't hear anything that most people would necessarily feel compelled to upgrade to unless you're in that creative photo or video space.
If I was still using an iPhone XS or an iPhone 11/11 Pro, yeah, I would be upgrading. But the 12 is... I was just thinking, I was like, I used to upgrade every year, but it was based on the carrier cycles, and so yeah.
Yeah, I know we've talked about this at some point in the past, but I've had partially an itch, partially a desire to do something more creative again. And, part of it is an interest in Peak Design's mobile line, which, fingers crossed, should be shipping in the next month and a half, based on the last updates. And on top of that, I've been trying to be more mindful of using the phone and not pulling out my camera gear for a lot of things, especially with video. Because with video, the phone is actually a better choice than my mirrorless. Photography-wise, I tend to still fall back to the mirrorless just because I have so much control over it so quickly. There's only so much that you can replace muscle memory with controls.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about the difference between what a phone can physically capture, sensor size and lens size and everything else versus the range that you have available on a full-bodied camera. And so I think for a lot of photo-related stuff, I'm still going to end up defaulting to the mirrorless just because I have it and because I'm so used to it. But this particular camera setup has me excited for what I might be able to do and maybe even sell like my backup DSLR and just trust the new mirrorless and the phone as my backup.
That's interesting.
I've been teetering there with the 12 Pro, and one of the big things that has kept me from actually jumping in on that is the fact that a lot of photos are still somewhat shaky that I take with the phone. Not bad, but the stability is still an issue in lower light conditions for sure. I'm going to have to try it, but that was part of what I felt was so compelling about that sensor shift optical image stabilization in the Pro Max, and I, of course, never had a chance to try it to know how it compares. And so having that available in they call it the wide lens, right? The normal default 1X.
Yeah.
So having that available in the camera lens that I use most might make the difference. Again, some hands-on practice and exploration with it's going to tell me for sure. But I know from a video standpoint, it's a far superior camera than my EOS R. And since I'm wanting to try to shift back into video more regularly, or at least have more fun with video than I've done for quite some time, it's a really compelling update. And the piece that really cemented that, like just the image stabilization wouldn't have done it. That cinematographic mode,
I feel like that's one of the hero features right now.
Absolutely. At a glance, it felt like maybe it would be interesting, maybe it wouldn't. Once they mentioned that they embed the depth map in the video and you can change the focus in post, that's what sealed the deal.
Same for me. That was awesome. That is such a cool thing.
And the main reason is because with video, that's where I end up screwing up more often than not when I'm trying to capture something like Jacob doing something. A small child running around doing things. It's very easy to have your focus screwed up. That is absolutely 100% a game changer in my mind. It's just if the feature lives up to the hype in practice.
Yeah. Well, the fact that they shot that video all on the iPhone 13 Pro, I thought that was so cool.
I mean, there've been a lot of campaigns that have talked about or shown that type of stuff, especially on the photo side of things, right? The whole Shot on iPhone campaign has shown that if you really work with what is available to you and take the time to learn the controls in different apps, depending on what you want to do, it's a more than capable camera. Like highly competitive with full-bodied camera systems for sure. The biggest difference from what I've worked with and what I know is just speed of capture. I'm so much faster getting what I want because I have the different individual manual controls on a camera that trying to do it learning the controls of a separate application on the phone, I just don't want to take the time to learn it. There's no compelling reason for me to.
Right.
Video, I don't have that same predisposition or bias because I haven't worked in video since the old Digital 8 days, It
was SD, right?
Yeah. And so I'm going to be learning a whole new workflow for video regardless. I don't have a problem learning it on the phone. And then if I learn the controls on the phone for video, the controls are basically the same for photography. So I feel like it will influence learning how to have better creative control over the photographic aspects of the phone as well. And that's why I think it's compelling that it might actually be capable enough to replace my backup camera, maybe even be my go-to primary camera except for specific events or occasions. And most of the choice there would be, do I need the range available to me on a lens that I have with my camera system, or am I able to get close enough or far enough from the subject with the phone? At least until they can give me, something like, 1x to 100x zoom in a phone, optical zoom on a phone.
Well, I would say they bumped it up to 3x, man.
They certainly made some improvements there, but it still doesn't. It just doesn't come close to the range of what I can get with one lens on my camera body.
Yeah, and the thing about your camera body is that if you wanted to, you can get quite very large lenses. And there are some aftermarket lenses, optical zoom lenses that you can stick in front of the phone. The marketing for those lenses, have provided some compelling pictures, but, it's the marketing for those lenses. So I don't know how reproducible that is.
Yeah, I've looked at those in the past. My big thing is that once I start getting lenses for the phone, I've kind of ruined the purpose of using the phone.
Yeah.
From my perspective as a camera, I don't want to have to add lenses to the phone.
No, I totally understand. If you're going to add a lens to something, you're going to add it to your full body camera. So,
yep.
I was also, I don't know, I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to talk about regarding that part of the camera, but I was also really impressed with the macro photography. That's a cool feature.
That's something that feels like it was kind of a finally moment.
Yes, absolutely, finally.
You can get the phone close enough to a lot of things. Why has it had so much trouble focusing for so long? And of course, physics, right? I mean, there are definite answers to that. But it seemed like it was something that should have been able to be solved 3 or 4 iterations ago. That said, I am looking forward to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, we talked about last show that Apple's just focused a lot on the software, like software processing of photos, and they made those tiny sensors do a lot with intelligent software, intelligent programming, and they haven't fallen back, but they haven't advanced the software only, like we said last show, the software will only advance an image so far, and you have to use you continue. You can't take your foot off the gas regarding the hardware. And it looks like with this phone, they're like, yeah, we need to focus more on the hardware, and like keep doing the software stuff, but also don't stop. Don't let that be a reason to not continue to advance the hardware as well.
Yeah, something I need to do is go back and look at the tech specs on the different sensors for the 12 Pro and the 13 Pro. I know they talked about having larger sensors. Well, this is where I cringed every time they said larger pixels, because it's not the best way to describe it, but I know what they were going for. So I know they talked about the advancements there and that these are larger sensors overall, but I would like to get a better feel for how much larger. Granted, a slight increase on a sensor that small is a huge increase, right? There's no reason to doubt the capabilities that they showed in the samples. It's just one of those things that because I understand a lot about the tech and because of the affinity for camera gear in general, I would like to have that comparison drawn out somewhere just so I see how big of a difference there is.
Right. This was not a keynote for camera nerds.
No.
This was a keynote for the press and regular folks. And
I can't help but believe if Phil had been on stage, though, he would have gone into it a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's that was one of one of the really cool things that I liked about Phil Schiller. He would well, he's not an engineer, but he knows. Like, he's an intelligent man. And it was always fun to see him get excited about those things. But I'm kind of glad.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't know. I'm kind of glad not to see him anymore, because it's like, he and Steve were like, co-presenters sometimes. And anyway.
Yeah, I miss seeing him show up occasionally. Like,
Me too.
I like having the diversity of presenters that they have now. I think it's much better because you get to see more of the group that actually works on a lot of these things. But there's also something to be said for every so often just give Phil or Craig the spotlight because they're fun to watch.
Yeah, I feel like Craig is one of the new presenters. Feels one of those.
Yeah, Craig definitely gets his time, I think, when you're talking about software.
Yeah, Phil is like Steve Jobs era presenter.
That's probably part of why I miss seeing him occasionally, because even though he was definitely not similar enough to Jobs from a presenter standpoint, like I certainly wouldn't say they fit the same vein, but I think having him occasionally present stuff just gave you that reassurance that there's still a Jobs-esque approach to presentation, I guess. But how much of that is just because I really loved the way Jobs presented?
Yeah, I mean, but it was interesting because Steve had a particular style and Phil had a particular style, and they sort of, their styles complemented each other in an interesting way. Like Steve was like focused, and he had particular ideas of like, this is what you should like, and Phil was very much like he was excited about it in a different kind of way. Steve was like, these are the things we should focus on, and this is awesome. And then and Phil's like, this stuff is amazing, and we should all be excited, kind of thing. I realized I said the same thing twice.
Yeah, I always felt like a similar type of comparison, but I think it may be a better way to capture it. Steve focused on these are why this is such a great thing. This is why you're going to love it. Everything else. He definitely did a great job of focusing the message. Steve was one that you felt like he would come up. These are great things. It's an amazing product, but I love this feature, and we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to show you why I love it. And you felt that passion for the feature that he was talking about. Whereas Steve certainly portrayed a level of passion for the product and the brand and everything else, but it was more holistic. Phil, you felt like could go off on a tangent because something was so great.
Yeah.
One thing that I feel like probably we didn't do as much of a service to is just how big an update the iPad mini really is. I know you alluded to it and you kind of mentioned it in the overview, but that's basically a mini iPad Pro.
Is it a mini iPad Pro or a mini iPad Air?
Well, it depends on how you want to compare it. So if you think about the first iteration iPad Pro, the mini definitely is better, right? And so that would have been the first generation pencil versus the second generation pencil that the mini is compatible with. So you could say it's a mini iPad Air, but I don't think that's doing it justice. Because I don't know if this may not be accurate. The iPad Air, does it include True Tone and all those other display features?
I believe so.
It might. So, full disclosure, once I got my iPad Pro, the first generation, I haven't paid attention to the iPad line since then because I just don't use it enough to even justify having one. I love its capabilities. It just doesn't fit my workflow. And so I use it as a glorified extra entertainment screen. And when I realized that it was never going to really fit my workflow, because I've had multiple iterations of iPads over the years, I finally decided, okay, it's great. I enjoy seeing updates. I enjoy seeing it be focused on, especially like in this event, having the iPad Pro really be a full-fledged iPad as well in its own right. Great. I'm 100% on board with it. It just doesn't get me excited because it doesn't fit any of my use cases. So as a result, I really don't know the specs of the iPads over the past 5 years, 4 years, however long the iPad Pro has been in existence.
Yeah, it's got the same features as the iPad Air. Like the display features are the same.
Okay, so it's a mini iPad Air, but the iPad Air is basically a budget iPad Pro at this point.
Yeah, well, it's a iPad that sits in between the Air and the Pro. It does have a better chip inside though. Like it's got the A15 and the Mini has the A15 and the Air has the A14.
Yeah, so from that perspective, just pure processing power, I would probably equate it to the Pro.
Yeah, but the Pro also has, the Pro has the M1, which is based on the A14 as well. Like it's a derivative of the A14. So,
well, we say that. We know it shares the same cores, but we don't really know that it's a derivative. Like that might be explaining it in a way that isn't accurate. You know what I mean? Like we call it a derivative because it's similar architecture from the cores that are used, and it's in a follow-up iPad, but it's maybe not a derivative as much as a related sibling. How much of the A14 and the M1 are actually identical versus how much is just shared componentry.
I feel like we're about to split hairs.
For me, it's more, I don't know chip design. I'm not a silicon expert by any means. And so I could see two chips, A14 and M1, use some of the same components, but I could also see the chips being designed completely differently, or differently enough that that you wouldn't necessarily consider it a derivative work as much as a coordinated
Yeah, I was
effort.
going to say derivative probably isn't fair because it was probably a coordinated effort. It's like they did this, they did this work on this nanometer, this nanometer technology, and they co-designed the chips. So in that case, they are, like maybe sibling chips, like you said. But because the M1 came after the A14, it's been, slapped with a derivative label because it was announced afterwards. So it's fair to say that they didn't just say, "Oh, we're going to make a chip for inside the Macs and we're going to base it on the A14." No, they co-developed that.
And I've been guilty of saying derivative as well. And I was thinking about it when they were talking about the A15 chip that's in the current lineup. I just don't think it's fair to think of any of the similar architecture chips as derivative works, because I don't think that's actually true. I think you could say that the A15 is a derivative of the A14, even if it has very different architecture, because it's the next iteration. You took what you learned with the A14 and you refined it, and that's how you get a derivative work. I think the A14 era, those cores, so the A14 and the M1, I don't think would have been developed in a way that would be derivative behind the scenes. We just look at it that way because of the timing of when they were introduced.
I mean, you could just simply say that we could easily say that the A14 is a derivative of the M1 the same way that we're saying that the reverse of that.
Right. It was just one of those nuances that kind of stuck in my head as they were talking about the A15, because the A15 obviously means we're going to see an M2 or however they're going to brand it. I mean, it's not that we didn't expect that anyway. It's just that there's no way you're going to see another round of Macs with an M1. Not with the A15 being present.
Right. I think I was just thinking it's like you could say that they're whatever core research, research on CPU cores that they were doing, you could go ahead and say that the A14 and M1 chips are derivatives of that core research.
Yeah, that would be a better way of encapsulating it.
Yeah, whereas saying that the M1 is a derivative of the A14 is not fair.
That was a longer tangent on chip design than I thought we would have.
Especially for people who don't know a thing about chip design, like nothing. I know that. Here's what I know. It's like you put it in. You if it gets hot enough, you need to put a heat sink on it and put some thermal paste between the chip and the sink. The heat sink.
At a glance, the A15 graphic that they showed looked like it was the same as the M1 graphic. Did you catch that?
I mean, I saw the similarity, but I think it's a graphic. I think there's some things that are accurate in the graphic, but I don't, like certainly when they say, okay, here the cores are over here, I think that's probably accurate. And this is, the neural processing is over here and the machine learning is over here. I think those things are, I think the big things like that are accurate, but I'm not entirely sure that everything they show in that graphic is perfectly accurate.
Oh, I guarantee it's not perfectly accurate. It's not a schematic. It's a marketing graphic.
Thank you. That's the short way of saying what I was trying to say. But yeah. I mean, but they've looked that way. They've looked fairly similar for a number of years. Like the A-series chips have looked fairly similar.
All that to say that it was a fairly solid event. I still don't think there will be a second September event. I just think there will be another event either in October. Well, probably October, but maybe November.
I don't think we'll see an October event. I don't think we'll see a November event. I think we will see an October event. I think we will see Macs in October. I think the Macs, whatever chip they put in the MacBook Pro, the larger MacBook Pro, and maybe we'll see like a 14-inch MacBook Pro and an iMac. I think we'll see Macs that have a derivative of whatever core research they did that provided us with the A15.
Yes, I agree. And my expectation would be October. It seems to make more sense to me in my head, just thinking about timing. But I could see it slipping to the first week in November.
Yeah, and they tend to do Mac events in October. I'm sure they've done a Mac event in November, but they tend to do those in October. And I don't think we'll see the M1 chip in any more devices.
So there were two surprising omissions that I had from this event, or that I thought about with this event.
Was one of them AirPods?
One of them was AirPods. Not so much that I felt that it was surprising as much as there's been enough talk about a next iteration. I was kind of thinking they would show up. I also kind of think AirPods are perfectly fine to show up in a press release.
Yes.
So that was a potentially interesting omission. So that's one of the two. The other one is there was not a lot of talk about the App Store and general initiatives like there normally would be with these events. Like they snuck some in as far as the environmental initiatives, for sure. You know, they reiterated the 100% recycled aluminum and upcycled plastic and stuff like that. So they did get some of the environmental initiatives in. I could be wrong, but it seems like this is the first event where they didn't have at least a brief overview of how many apps and all that kind of stuff related to the developer side of things for the phone.
I can't remember. Like, they certainly had some developers in the event. They had a nice montage video, which is way better than a demonstration.
Yes, like much better.
They need to not go back to demos anymore. They just need to have a montage. So one, I liked their videos. I think their transitions were a lot of fun. They got to show off how beautiful California is and make me jealous that I don't live there. And but yeah, that was like, I was actually interested in the apps that they were showing. I was interested in what the developers had to say about the hardware. And they did it in a way that was like, we know exactly how long this is going to be, and we know how to make it not boring. And they did a great job with that. And that needs to not change ever.
Yep, I agree. Now, I'm pretty sure the main reason there was not any conversation about App Store or anything else is because of how many different things have been in the works from a legal and regulatory perspective over the past couple weeks or so.
Right. They don't want to brag about winning their case against Epic. That would be just very untasteful to brag about that.
Well, and in South Korea, right? Was it South Korea? No, it was Japan, where they're now being forced to implement the ability, the Netflix exclusion thing.
Reader apps.
Yeah, where they can link to their website to tell you about the service instead of having no links whatsoever. And there was one other big one that was talking about you couldn't exclude linking to outside services to discuss payment options. Was that in the Epic?
I think there was no. I thought there was I knew there was a Japan one, and I thought there was a Korea one as well.
Might have been. Like, there's been enough news that I think overall the status quo is going to remain. I don't think we're going to see a forced ability to sideload apps, which I really hope we never see. But it seems like I had seen headlines that focused on could not, of course, reader apps being able to link to their site to sign up for services, that should have been done long ago. It's kind of a stupid thing that it ever got to the point that it was at. But I recall a headline that said that they must also allow developers to include a link or at least advertise the ability to process payment outside of Apple's payment system.
That might have been the class action lawsuit.
Maybe.
There was a developer. Well, so there was a app developer class action lawsuit that Apple just settled. It never made it to court. They decided to settle. And I'm trying to remember what their...
But either way,
they didn't really...
the general idea is that there's been enough talk and enough publicity about some things that are changing with the App Store that it makes sense not to talk about the App Store in this event. But it also makes sense from the perspective of WWDC is the proper venue for talking about the App Store because you're talking to developers about development-related things. So it may also be that this is a shift away from repeating a lot of that same kind of stuff that you would generally have at WWDC. And it may have started even with last year's iPhone event. That's where I'm fuzzy because, 2020 completely destroyed any sense of time and reality. And so...
You only needed to keep track of time in the before times.
Right. And so it may be that 2020 was the first event, as far as the iPhone event, that did not have at least some general state of affairs at the beginning. And it may be that I've just completely conflated that memory and it normally doesn't. But that was something that I noticed was not present. There was no state of affairs or different initiatives, that initial 5 minutes of introduction that's all stuff that I don't care about.
Right.
Or maybe rephrase it, all stuff that, sure, I care about in the sense that I care that something's being done, but I don't care about you telling me about it.
Right. We can read the press release.
Right.
Yeah, just a little real-time update. The Korea the Korean lawsuit is what's making Apple and Google to allow developers a way to use a payment system outside of Apple's. Okay. And
I thought Korea came to mind, but then I realized the one I was thinking about was Japan for the.
Well, Japan apps is allowing developers of reader apps. Japanese lawsuit is the one that's allowing reader apps to link outside of the app. So when you download Netflix, it doesn't do anything unless you sign in, and it doesn't tell you what to do. There's no per Apple's developer laws, you can't. Well, because Apple doesn't want to because Netflix doesn't want to give Apple 15%, the app doesn't do anything except allow you to sign in. They can't link to their website to show you how to sign up for an account. So the Japanese lawsuit is making it so that you can link to your, if you have an app, you can link to your website to do whatever it is that you want to do there. So there's some stipulations as to exactly where the link can lead you to, but basically in the Netflix example, Netflix could link to netflix.com/signup.
Yeah, it's something that should have been opened up anyway. It's kind of an asinine rule to begin with, and that's putting it nicely. I understand how it got to that point, just thinking about how the rule, the spirit of the rule versus the implementation versus how it evolves from an enforcement perspective. But that doesn't mean it was ever a good rule.
So it might have been a good rule for the first few years of the App Store, but by 2010,
yeah, for sure,
there's a lot of things that needed to change because the App Store drove the prices of software down like incredible, significantly. And, where it used to be, we'd pay hundreds of dollars for a suite of applications that might be 5 applications that work together. I'm thinking of like an office suite or a productivity suite. You're not spending more than $50 anymore. Like $50 seems like an exorbitant amount of money when, like the one application Photoshop used to be, I don't know, was it like $700, $600 or $700 just for Photoshop?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it was quite that high, but it was definitely in the $400 to $500 range.
Yeah. It was a lot of money. And it's like, I can't think of any software that, there was so speaking of software, this is a gripe I have about the App Store. I saw the Peak Finder app in the presentation today. And I don't know if you noticed that app.
I noticed it. I thought it was interesting.
I thought it was a cool looking app. That's an app that I will gladly pay some money for that app. So I go and I look and I see it's $4.99. I was like, that's a lot of money for an app. But I was like, it's $5. That's so, $5. I will buy that app. But when I went and searched for Peak Finder, at the top, the first hit was a different app that was an ad. So it's like, whoever the developer was, they're targeting, people looking for Peak Finder, and their app looks pretty similar. Their screenshots look pretty similar, without, like, for a split second, I was like, is that? No, that's not the app I'm looking for. It's not called Peak Finder. I can't remember what it was called. It was very similarly named. And I was like, no, that's not the one that they showed. And I go, the next, like the top hit that's not an ad was the app that I was looking for. And I was just like, why are there ads in the App Store? Yeah, I get it. I get it, but I don't get it.
Yeah, I this is one of those things where I don't have a problem with ads in the App Store. I have a problem with ads in the App Store that become the first choice when you search for a very specific thing.
Yes, I have that same problem, and I might not be so incensed by this if the App Store wasn't the wasteland that it is. Like right now, like the reason I specifically wanted to find that Peak Finder app is because Apple demoed the app, and it looked really cool. It's very much in line with the things that I like in life. It's something that I would have a lot of fun with. And if Apple is showing that app in their presentation that they're showing to Apple has the widest reach for let's show you an app, then a wider reach than any app developer does. Apple is the biggest Apple app developer, and they are, and they're going to have the widest and most influential reach. So I'm like, if they're going to show this app, I'm confident that this is a really good app. I don't have to read anything. I will pay the $5. It's like when, like another example is like the Monument Valley. Apple featured Monument Valley. Like I'd already bought it and played the game, so I knew how amazing it was. And so to see Apple feature it, I was like, yeah, this is the quality app that Apple features. And so it's really hard, like I'm in a place where like if I want to look for a game in the App Store, I go straight to Apple Arcade. Like I don't search for games. I don't go looking for other games because games are the worst in the App Store. They're like the worst kind of apps are games. And so it was just, I was very, very, there's a problem, like there's an obvious problem with how Apple is treating developers, and it affects all of the users. And it just should, this is not the kind of experience that Apple wants us to have, but they're not demonstrating a way. I feel like if they were to let go of the reins just a little bit, like I'm not saying like make it the Wild West, but if they just did everything to promote making developers want to develop for the platform, it would be a very different world within the ecosystem, and it would be a much better world.
Yeah, I do think that with the recent round of legal and regulatory actions, there pretty much has to be a rethink of what the App Store looks like. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to result in much change, if any. But it you would have to say that a company as intelligent as Apple has shown itself to be in general wouldn't just say, we're just going to continue to deal with the different things as they come. You would think that at this point they would have to say, we're going to take a step back. We're not going to have any of this public, of course, but we're at least going to take a step back and think of what we can change, what makes sense to change, and what we can improve that makes developers as happy as customers, or at least close the gap in developer satisfaction versus customer satisfaction.
So I don't want to make it seem like I think Apple Inc. is a altruistic company, because it's a company and companies do what companies do. And, it's very obvious to see that with the Epic court case. And, Epic did a thing, and that's what a company is supposed to do when they're a company. And Apple responded the way a company is supposed to respond. And they went back and forth until the lawyers won, and Apple, it's a mark on the win, but they're having to concede something that they didn't want to have to concede. But at the same time, there were some interesting emails that came out in the discovery process, and they were made public. And it makes me wonder. It's like, like I said, it's like Apple's a company and it does company things, but the company is run by human people, and they might be out of touch with reality, and they might not, because they are living in their world where they're doing Apple things. And I wonder how much of their hands are tied behind their back. I think we've talked about this on the show, that it's like, do they want to make these changes, but they can't, fearing repercussion from shareholders?
I've heard that argument a number of times. I don't think shareholder sentiment actually sways much. I really think it's more a matter of just general risk to the brand versus bottom line. So prior to the different inquiries and legal actions, what was the risk to the brand? It was relatively low. It was a vocal risk. There was no tangible repercussion. Now you've had court cases that have had some repercussion, even if they're not necessarily to the bottom line in a directly tangible way, but at least in a way that starts to affect how people view the general company and brand and its valuation, right?
So I think you're going where like I meant to go, and it's like, so when I said shareholders was not correct. It's like, I don't think Tim Cook is a man that's like motivated by the bottom dollar. Like, I don't think that's what when he makes decisions at Apple. I don't think like it's certainly not something that is not considered, but I don't think it's the driving force for decisions that he makes. Because Apple has a lot of money, like a lot of money, and he's one of the reasons why Apple has a lot of money, because he's a bean counter, and by nature, or from his background, but it's if they make a certain kind of move, it could Wall Street's going to react in a negative way, because Wall Street's terrible in that regard, and I guess maybe like the question is like, is the fear of a Wall Street reaction holding them hostage in any way with making big changes in the App Store, or is it just like this is the brand, and we're not going to change the brand. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of nuances there as well. The Gruber has made the point repeatedly that the phone is not a computer, the phone's a console. And it's in the same general console market space as far as the way the App Store is run and things work. The reason we think of it as a computer is because of how it was initially presented and explained from an operating system perspective.
Right. But a console is a type of computer, so I agree with Gruber's assessment.
And so as long as you are continuing to still kind of operate in that console mentality, I think some of the other things are almost shut off as avenues of pursuit because you're not, you don't recognize the platform the same way. You think of a computer and you think of a completely different set of restrictions and things around it. So I'm wondering at this point, because of the number of years where internally maybe the phone was not thought of as a computer, but externally it has been thought of as a computer, if that's not the primary driving point of friction. Because it seems like most of the arguments can really be boiled down to, well, I want to use it like a computer versus I want the inherent protections these other restrictions apply. Neither avenue is wrong. It's all in how you perceive the device. And so if internally it has been perceived in this other fashion, just to a point where it's ingrained, how easy is it to ignore certain arguments because they don't fit that model, or maybe be blinded to the repercussions of how a relatively simple change like the ability for Netflix to put a link to like the sign up page in the app erases those friction points between what you're actually trying to create and preserve versus how a large group of outsiders perceives a device because of its capabilities. And as you start to understand that difference in perception, you can find a more or less middle ground that maintains your vision for the product and the different positives that you gain from treating it that way, while not completely alienating this group that says, but I know it's capable of doing more and being better because it's really just a computer in your pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And to be fair, I do think the number of people who want a fully customizable computer in the pocket that they can sideload apps on is relatively small.
It's so small.
And it's misguided. If that's what you want, go Android.
I mean, that's another topic.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll save that as a separate topic. I have a lot I can rant on there.
This was actually a separate topic too, but but it was, it was a thing you saw, you pointed out, it made sense.
So with the event, do you have any wrap up thoughts or anything else to close us out with, or?
So the iPhone 13 is a good solid iPhone 12s. True to, like in the old days, the S version was the one that got like a really good camera upgrade, and I think we saw exactly that, and I'm glad to see that. That's great for the future of iPhones, and I think the watch was like pretty cool updates. So it's coming from a person who does not have a watch, so yeah, I'd like to have seen AirPods, but also not surprising. And I'm fine if it comes in a press release before the Mac event.
Yeah, I'm excited.
There was an iPad.
Yeah. I'm excited about the 13 Pro, obviously, just from the camera perspective. That's what speaks to me anyway with each new version of the phone, because the rest of it is always just an improvement. Steady iteration when it comes to the silicon, and steady iteration when it comes to battery life and performance. And those are things that we've come to expect. And even if they were the same as the previous model with improved performance, I think we're at a point where that doesn't make a huge difference. I am glad to see improvements in battery life as well. But yeah, that camera system, it sold me.
Yeah, no, it's solid. We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.